And you ended up studying under Habermas. Was he somebody you'd studied previously? You were excited to work with?
The longer version is I went over to study with him. I was in his colloquium, and I studied with him. And then we had a falling out, and then I finished my PhD with someone else. But not on bad terms. It's just I discovered while writing my PhD that the stakes were very low and the personalities were very difficult. And I also discovered, partly in proximity to him, but in proximity to other people who were kind of world class, one meeting with Luhmann, watching debates between Habermas and Appel, people came to the colloquium in Habermas, that I had certain abilities they didn't have to like be a builder. Mm-hmm. And while I was good enough to be in the room with them and argue with them on where I was a technical expert, dedicating myself to reading and writing all day was not what I wanted. And they did not seem to understand. I wouldn't have put it in these terms because I hadn't built anything, but they didn't have the right personality for building.
Yeah. Well, there's a certain, from the business world perspective, there's a certain dysfunction to a lot of the smartest academics, that they're very good at some things, but they can never come out into what we see as the real world. I guess for them, that they're in their own real world.
Yeah, this is true. I would say, in fairness to people at the level of like Appel, Habermas, Luhmann, and others that I ran into. Bella came to a speech, gave a speech at Harvard. I think they would have succeeded at anything.
Really?
There is a level. Now maybe it would have to be low on human management, but there are entrepreneurs who are low on human management.
They're just so smart. They'd iterate and figure it out with their wisdom.
The level of talent that, just take Niklas Luhmann, who's it wouldn't be for the audiences probably the most important thinker of social thought post World War II. Wrote more than most of us read in a life, and developed this kind of theory, systems theory, which was a way of explaining how humans and systems function. That basically is, if you were only reading one thing, you would read this. One of the really important things about working with people at that level is you're working with people at that level. There's just a way in which the gears are different. And while I don't think they would build or run Palantir particularly well, I do think that they could materially advance an institution. They might have to have someone below them who could actually interact with the people, but these are people who are, just like when we were, building Palantir together, our engineers.
Yeah, the very best in the world.
The very, very best in the world the brain structure is different. And one of the things that our institutions underestimate, but we have an advantage in America because we have this tech scene, is the people think that there's they're with a standard deviation of the best if you're the second best, but it's not. It's just a different universe. It's not true. Yeah. And you see this in software and building software products. The very best in the world, the people who built PG, the brain structure, the way of solving problems, it is not at all similar to how, I don't want to mention their last names because I think one of them is happily not famous. But,
I think a picture comes out for him when he searches online.
On PG with Bob, there are very few people who could have pulled that off. And I think I would say if you took Ryan and Bob and put them in an academic context, I don't think Bob McGrew minds. I'll leave Ryan's last name out, but they would do very, very well.
Yeah, well, Bob obviously went on to OpenAI to do very important work there. It's an interesting point about talent that I think you framed in a way. It was very helpful to think about that you actually have to be within a couple standard deviations to even appreciate this. And so I think a big problem with a lot of our institutions, for example, around the Pentagon, is if you have people who are only one standard deviation above, they can't even tell a difference between 4 and 5. And they have no idea what's even going on at those levels. So you need people who are good enough to even appreciate that.
We have a huge advantage, and let's just take U.S. commercial. This is a really true thing and really not understood, that to appreciate talent, you need to be within standard deviation of that talent. Unless you have some specialized weird, this is where, for whatever reason, I think I have some kind of weird ability where, I have picked some of the best and managed some of the best engineers in the world consistently. larger institutions struggle in some cases because they think they can't tell the difference between.
Well, I think it's almost like those cultures reject these people who are extremely good, right?
But again, to your American optimism thing, which I share, and we have a culture that nurtures them, allows them to be managed, provides capital, teaches them. Like, one of the things I think people get wrong is you don't learn to win by failing. You learn to win by working with people who have ups and downs and then win. So there's like a deep understanding, whether they work with you at 8VC or they work with others, some of whom I like and some of whom I don't, but you do learn what it means to build business. And in the American commercial context, especially, you have this high turnover. So it's like people really do, the people running these institutions on the tech side, 5 years ago, CIOs didn't buy our product. Now they do. Because it's like there's this like plasticity of learning in the US, which is something that I think other countries struggle with. That it is true that identifying the difference between Bob and Ryan and any very strong normal engineer is something that takes specialized. Quite frankly, I think it's very similar to music. Very few people can hear the blue note. Almost no one can play it. To be what we do in tech is we hear the blue note on the tech talent side, which very few people. It's like you roll three crazy people into a room, and a very talented normal person will pick the one person who's moderately talented. Whereas if you roll those three people into Palantir or to your VC, we'll be like, no, we want that one. And that's great. Then you have to be able to manage that person. That's also...
Basically, that's like my karma to have to manage these people now after you had to deal with us when we were kids. So that's how we're doing it.
Well, I have a lot of stories about our times together. But our times together are some of the best of my life.
Oh.